I'm sure many of you who have been in these circles for more than 5 years at least have come across the first kind of debate that occurs always when you start to talk about the economic system of fascism or national socialism or third position economics, or even if you want to talk about the history of other regimes that took inspiration from Axis powers from World War II, such as, the Peronist government in Argentina. You will obviously, come across the system of corporatism, and a lot of people conflate corporatism with the rule of society by corporations in the sense of the word, meaning a large business, and obviously that's not what it is. So I wanted to go into depth on what the actual meaning of corporatism really is. I know there's been tons of videos made on this in the past. Unfortunately, a lot of our friends here have gotten banned off YouTube, and I'm lucky that I'm still on here for some reason. So I decided to kind of take the opportunity to spread the information across once again to hopefully educate people a little bit more on what this system is. And to do this, I'm going to be quoting from an article written by Zoltanous. I don't know if his channel is up anymore, but it was a very good article, and I will link it in the description of this video so you can actually read the article yourself, because it goes much more in depth with statistics and refuting claims against corporatism and whatnot. And so I really do recommend you not only watch this video, but also go beyond this video and do the legwork and do some reading for yourself. It'll definitely do you some good. When the term corporatism is mentioned, it often evokes thoughts of cronyism and fascism, but this association should be challenged. Corporatism should not be linked to cronyism, corporatocracy, and in fact stands in direct opposition to it. Corporatism advocates for a complete rejection of the dominance of mammon. It should not be confused with modern capitalist entities commonly referred to as corporations. The term itself has much older roots, referring to the guilds in Italy known as the Corporazione, or the corporations of arts and crafts. However, the doctrine of corporatism predates even these guilds, with various theorists and political figures approaching it from different perspectives. Elements of corporatism can be found within the feudal societies and in the political writings of Christian thinkers like St. Thomas Aquinas. While corporatism is an integral part of National Socialism and fascism, its scope extends beyond these two ideologies. For instance, Portugal under Salazar implemented a corporatist system, but Salazar himself was neither a fascist nor a National Socialist, as he viewed fascism as quote-unquote pagan Caesarism and suppressed the national syndicalists in his country. Instead, his corporatism was rooted in his Catholicism. Similarly, in the former Portuguese colony of Brazil, the leader, Vargas, established a non-fascist corporate state. The same can be said of King Carol II in Romania, who violently suppressed the Iron Guard after establishing a royal dictatorship in the late 1930s. There are even older examples that may not have used the term corporatism, such as Otto von Bismarck's state socialism, which did not label its system as corporatist, but can be considered a variation of it. A lot of times when people talk about corporatism, they never really go in depth as to how the system would work. They often will say things like, well, we'll just have the state control big business and bend the will of business in the interest of a nation. And that part of that's not completely incorrect. That is part of it. That's sort of, historically speaking, that's sort of a more earlier phase of corporatism. And later during, certain regimes, the state became more centralized. Italy is a good example of this. And I believe at one point in history, it was the second most centralized economy in the world, just behind the Soviet Union. So I'm going to requote the article here, and this is going to go in depth on how the actual system itself manages in the interior sense of governmental organization and whatnot. Corporate unions play a dual role of safeguarding both the interests of workers with their respective industries and their political influence. This is evident in the composition of the Grand Council, where each industry is represented, ensuring specialized representation based on economic activities such as agriculture, commerce, manufacturing, transportation, and more. Within a corporatist framework, policy decisions are guided by the principles of unity and harmony. For instance, measures would be implemented to address job displacement, such as tariffs, policies on outsourcing, and trade regulations. Any class, be it capital or labor, that seeks to prioritize its own advancement at the expense of the collective will face suppression. However, it should be noted that the proletariat and labor pose a lesser threat to the collective than capital. Our aim is not to advocate for the redistribution of wealth by quote-unquote eating the rich, but rather to improve the living conditions of the lower classes within our society and nation. While we may not hesitate to change and bring down the higher classes when necessary, our underlying principle is one of harmony. Therefore, it is crucial to have programs and safety nets in place to support the impoverished. While such initiatives may already exist in non-corporatist states, under corporatism they are enhanced or newly established. Corporatism seeks to transcend social class divisions, uniting everyone under a greater ideal beyond the pursuit of accumulating wealth. Rather than launching direct attacks on the upper class, it is more productive to focus on uplifting the less fortunate members of society. However, it is important to address the tendency of the wealthy to exploit and hinder the progress of the less privileged, necessitating measures to limit their influence. Similarly, labor, as promoted by Marxism, is elevated above national boundaries, which poses challenges to the concept of national unity. The prevalence of nationalization in Italy during the rise of fascism is an undeniable reality. This is a point that critics of corporatism from the liberal perspective accurately highlight. Increased state control and intervention are indeed outcomes of this approach, but they should not be viewed as inherently negative. Corporations play a regulatory role within the state by encouraging the growth of business in areas where privately produced essential goods and services are insufficient, while discouraging businesses in areas where there are a surplus of non-essential goods and services. This prevents private enterprises from manipulating government standardized prices by intentionally limiting the production of essential goods and creating artificial demand through advertising and other methods. Corporatism allows for the coexistence of private enterprise and private property within certain limits, while also justifying major state projects. In the corporatist system, the labor force and management within an industry belong to an industrial organization such as a guild, syndicate, or corporation. Representatives from these groups are elected to form an assembly of labor and management which resolves issues through collective negotiation. The corporations have three main responsibilities: regulation of relations within the industry through negotiation, planning the industry's development or closure in collaboration with the state and entrepreneurs, and ensuring the social well-being of industry participants through measures like insurance and retirement plans. Corporatism extends beyond the economic sphere. For example, in Italy, the law of May 17, 1928 made the state more technocratic. Article 3 granted the right to propose candidates for the Ground Council of the National Confederation of Syndicates, and the final vote, as seen in Articles 2 and 6, was given to the people themselves. After approval by the Grand Council, the vote was conducted. The technocratic approach is often reflected in Article 31 of the Constitution of Fiume, where similar mechanisms are observed. Simply put, corporatism is a system of representation that places all societal interests under the authority of the nation as a whole by establishing occupational trade associations like guilds, unions, and labor courts. We can observe similar organizations even in non-corporatist states, such as labor courts in certain American states like Kansas and Pennsylvania. Furthermore, we can see that unions in non-corporatist societies often lack effective governance, which is exemplified in the case of America. In a corporatist society, unions are integrated into the state apparatus, preventing them from causing significant economic damage. This defense of corporatism is also a defense of nationalism. Firstly, we view these two concepts as interconnected. Secondly, the main argument for corporatism is built upon nationalism. Corporatism not only has a historical connection to nationalism, but also requires adherence to nationalist principles. Corporatism is an economic and social system that aims to unify all economic factors, including labor and capital, for the benefit of the nation. In this system, employers and employees are organized into syndicates, and representatives from each industry and occupations are elected to these syndicates. These syndicates are then brought together under a central body called a corporation, giving rise to the term corporatism. Within these corporations, representatives from both sides coordinate economic activities, determine labor conditions, set wages, and regulate price through price controls. The system is highly flexible, capable of both limiting and freeing economic activity when necessary. And one thing that I would like to add here, when it comes to syndicates, or what we would just call unions in America, the good thing about integrating them into the state is that it would give them legal status. Now, of course, there's tons of examples of these unions of having legal status in America, but if you actually make them part of the state, this gives them more potency, so to speak. This gives them more of a leg to stand on when it comes to advocacy for the interests of labor. Now, simultaneously, we don't live in a society where the vast majority of individuals are proletarians by the Marxian definition of, being a factory worker or whatnot. A lot of people work white-collar jobs or some variation of them, and those people would probably need a form of that as well for representation. So this kind of system would probably work best in a society with multiple distinctions and classes of a worker. And I think that's also a very important thing to add here, is that you're going to need different representatives within the body that can also have legal status, potentially pass laws or advocate laws. And then, of course, you need a grand mediator between all of these interests, which would then be the state itself. Now, there is the question that always comes up, which is what's stopping the corporations? And when I say corporations here, I should probably say large businesses, because I don't want to use these terms synonymously when we're trying to make a distinction here. What's stopping the large businesses in this system from just bribing the government to, err on their side? Well, what would stop them is basically a few things. First of all, if the state had access to all of the resources, therefore would also have access to all of the resources that the large business would have at their own will, then there wouldn't be really much room to bribe because they would have no leveraging power over it. Also, if the banking system was fully state-run and not quasi-state, quasi-private as it is now, then there would be no room for bribery, so to speak. Also, if it was less democratic in the sense of, mass democratic with elections and whatnot, there would be no need for donors because there would be no campaigns to donate to in the first place if there were no elections held in that sense. So I think that kind of covers that. There's also a good quote from Lawrence Dennis, who was an American fascist, and he, basically said that, the state has access to all, to hard power, which really, at the end of the day, can sort of triumph over, soft power bribery when necessary, which is true. Now, the reason I want to conclude with this section is because this goes back to the last two videos that I made, where I was saying that, corporatism, of course, is a system that aims to destroy corruption, basically. But no system is impervious to corruption because corruption is not a product of simply just material conditions. It's a product of the nature of your spirit. And that is what determines whether or not a system is corrupt.